It is 18:09 in Moscow, just 5 minutes after flight 1492 has taken off. Ahead of them are enormous clouds ranging from 6,000 feet to 29,000 feet, according to the information they have.
Autopilot engaged.
Looks like we're in for a few minutes of turbulence.
At this moment, the Sukhoi Superjet is at 3,900 feet, climbing to the 7,000 feet indicated by the airport controller. May 5, 2019, Sheremetyevo International Airport, Moscow, Russia. It's 17:30, and here, a Sukhoi Superjet 100 of Aeroflot is about to head to its takeoff runway. The day has been good on the ground so far, although there are some clouds bringing storms towards the airport at higher altitudes. Flight 1492 is a domestic flight between Moscow and Murmansk, which should take less than 3 hours. The Sukhoi Superjet 100 is only 2 years old with 2,710 flight hours. This Russian-made aircraft is used for regional flights and has a capacity of between 68 and 103 passengers. This plane bears some resemblance to the Airbus A320, although its market competitors are the Embraer E-Jets and the Bombardier C-Series. The Superjet 100 incorporates the fly-by-wire flight control system. At the controls of Flight 1492 is Captain Denis Yevdokimov, 42 years old with 6,800 flight hours, 1,570 of which are in Superjet 100 aircraft. He is accompanied by First Officer Maxim Kuznetsov, 36 years old with 765 flight hours, 615 of them in this type of aircraft. The crew is completed by 3 flight attendants, and together with 73 passengers, there are a total of 78 people on board Aeroflot Flight 1492. At 17:55, the Superjet 100 began to taxi towards runway 24C, from which it is scheduled to take off. The first officer will be at the controls, while the captain will handle communications. At 18:04, Flight 1492 started to accelerate down the runway. They took off without any problems and set course for Murmansk. In the initial moments of the flight, the captain set the heading to 317 and engaged the autopilot. This directed them straight into a massive cumulus cloud formation, waiting at an approximate altitude of 6,000 feet, about 1,800 meters, and reaching up to around 29,000 feet, approximately 8,800 meters.
Autopilot engaged.
Looks like we'll have a few minutes of turbulence.
The pilots accepted that they would have to pass through the storm. They could have requested vectors from ATC to avoid it, but decided it was unnecessary. Their first ascent was to 7,000 feet, after which they would contact the controller for further instructions. The plane entered the clouds. It wasn't raining, but there was a significant thunderstorm within.
Aeroflot 1492, stabilized at FL70.
Climb to 9,000, please.
Roger, climbing to 9,000.
The captain selected the new altitude, and once again, the Superjet began to climb. A few seconds later, when they were at 8,900 feet, the storm intensified and a loud explosion caused the plane to jolt. A lightning strike had hit Flight 1492. Electrical systems began to fail, the autopilot disengaged and stopped working, and the radio went dead. The pilots waited a few minutes to see if the electrical system would recover and allow them to reactivate the autopilot and continue their flight. But this did not happen.
We're turning back. I'll take manual control. Try to communicate with the tower and look up how to land safely in the manual.
Meanwhile, the first officer activated code 7600 on the transponder, indicating a loss of communications. Now, as they descended without autopilot, the storm's effects became more pronounced, with strong winds jostling the plane even after they had left the main cloud mass.
According to the manual, we shouldn't use auto throttle. Fly and balance the plane manually, and land with flaps at 25 degrees.
After relaying these instructions, the first officer tried communicating again and finally succeeded. The controller gave them vectors for runway 24L.
Aeroflot 1492, heading 210 until you capture the localizer for the runway. We're not ready. We're too high. We'll make a loop and try again.
The worst was over. There was no rush to land. Burning off some additional fuel was also beneficial, so the captain made a complete turn while continuing the descent. The captain struggled to reach the correct altitude as there was significant wind and the automatic systems remained inoperative. Alarms sounded in the cockpit due to the captain's abrupt maneuvers to align with the runway. At 18:23, they finally managed to deploy the landing gear. It seemed that neither the lightning strike nor the electrical failures would prevent the Superjet from making it back to Moscow in one piece. At this moment, they were about 9 kilometers from the runway and descending. They had everything ready for an emergency landing, carrying around 1,600 kilograms of extra fuel, which significantly exceeded the maximum recommended landing weight. Still, they followed all the recommendations provided in the manual. At 18:27, just 1,100 feet above the ground, and barely 2 minutes from landing, a new problem arose. The aircraft started issuing a wind shear alert. This alert indicated to the crew that they should perform a go-around and attempt the landing again to avoid the dangerously approaching crosswinds. However, the captain ignored this alert, which sounded for 11 seconds, and continued descending. The wind buffeted the aircraft, pushing it off the glide path, triggering more alerts in the cockpit. The captain increased the throttle in a desperate attempt to counteract the wind, managing to get back on the glide path at the last moment. However, the plane was now flying too fast as it reached the runway threshold. After more than 900 meters of floating above the runway, Flight 1492 finally touched down, but with a near zero pitch angle, causing the plane to bounce and ascend about 2 meters. Two seconds later, the Superjet hit the runway again with a force of nearly 6 G, but bounced once more, this time even higher than the first. The captain activated the thrust reversers in a desperate bid to stop the aircraft on the runway, but since they were airborne due to the second bounce, the reversers did not engage. 3 seconds later, the plane hit the runway again with a force of 5G, causing the nose gear to collapse completely. The fuel tanks ruptured, and the kerosene ignited, engulfing the rear of the Superjet in flames. The aircraft finally came to a stop between runway 24L and 2 taxiways, transformed into a massive fireball. The cabin crew initiated the evacuation. The cabin quickly filled with thick black smoke as some passengers crawled towards the exits. After 70 seconds, people were still sliding down the forward slides. The evacuation turned chaotic, with some passengers insisting on taking their luggage, significantly delaying the process. A passenger named Dmitry Khlebushkin became the center of controversy by obstructing others with his luggage as they tried to escape. Flight attendant Tatiana Kasatkina emerged as the hero of the day, accelerating the operation by grabbing several passengers by the neck who insisted on taking their bags and pushing them out. Ultimately, 41 of the 78 people on board perished in this catastrophic landing. What had happened? How could a flight that seemingly could fly without major issues end so dramatically? The investigation, conducted by the Interstate Aviation Committee along with the BEA and ESA, determined that while the aircraft did suffer a lightning strike during the flight, causing damage to antennas, sensors, lights, cockpit windows, and various electrical systems, these damages were not severe enough by themselves to cause this catastrophe. All the blame fell on the captain. The official report states that the primary cause of the accident was the poor management of the situation by the pilots, who did not request to avoid the storm area. Additionally, the captain executed the approach with a bank angle of over 40 degrees, deviating more than 200 feet, 61 meters, from the assigned altitude and ignoring all auditory alerts. The report continues to explain that the captain carried out a completely destabilized approach, disregarding the wind shear alerts. In June 2023, Captain Yevdokimov was sentenced to 6 years in prison and 3 years of disqualification for violating air safety measures that resulted in the deaths of 41 people.